But wait a minute, who is this Lazarus guy? Like, John just suddenly, Lazarus is cuddling with Jesus at all the dinners? Like, what's going on with this? All previous Gospels, never heard of him. All previous Gospels, there's no such person in the story. All previous Gospels fail to mention his great fame as the reason the Sanhedrin tried to kill Jesus. John specifically says the Sanhedrin decided to kill Jesus when he resurrected Lazarus, that it was the great fame of that miracle that was making Jesus too famous, so now we have to kill him. You'd think if that's the great famous thing that happened that caused the elite to kill Jesus, that the other gospel writers before John would have heard of it, but they did not. There is, however, only one Lazarus in any gospel before John, a fictional person in a parable written by Luke. Do you know the parable of Lazarus, which is there's the beggar Lazarus and there's the rich man who kept ignoring him and didn't throw him any alms, and then the rich man ends up in hell and he's burning, and he sees Lazarus also died, but he sees Lazarus up resting in the bosom of Abraham, cuddling Abraham, and he begs him to help him out. Just one dip of water, just for a second. That's all I need. This is so horrible down here. Just give me one little tiny bit of mercy. And the response is like, no, fuck you. You had all the prophets. You had all the opportunities. Now you're getting what's due. And he says, oh, okay, that's fair, I guess. But could you resurrect Lazarus? Could you bring Lazarus back from the dead and send him to my brothers to warn my brothers so that they don't make the same mistakes I did? And that's when they say, like, nope, we're not going to raise Lazarus from the dead. If they don't listen to the scriptures, then they're screwed, and that's just the way it is. So that's the version of the story in Luke. So notice what John does with this story. So in the parable, like I just mentioned, Lazarus is a beggar who goes to heaven and there rests on the bosom of Abraham. So now we have a Lazarus cuddling with someone resting in the bosom of Abraham. A rich man burning in hell begs Abraham to raise Lazarus from the dead so he can go and convince the rich man's living brothers to repent. But Abraham says if his brothers haven't believed the scriptures, neither will they believe a resurrected Lazarus. This is a parable, and in Luke, it's a parable that Jesus is telling. Of course, the point of a parable like this is kind of obvious. It's an explanation for why no one actually returns from the dead. So it's supposed to be the general resurrection. It's supposed to be the end times. Why aren't the apostles going around raising the dead? I mean, I think your mojo of your religion doesn't work because you're not raising people from the dead. And so they tell this story. Like, well, Jesus told a parable that explains this. He says that he's not going to raise anyone from the dead because if you don't listen to the scriptures, that's it. Which is a typical kind of con man kind of response to why you can't raise people from the dead when you're supposed to be able to. But notice John doesn't like this. He reverses the story entirely. He invents a real Lazarus. So he takes Lazarus out of the parable, makes him real, and he's a real Lazarus who actually does rise from the dead and actually does convince people to repent and has him rest on the bosom of Jesus instead of the bosom of Abraham. So Abraham in the parable is deciding who goes to heaven and hell. Jesus is now in the role of Abraham. He's being described in the position of Abraham. So Jesus is the one who now decides who goes to heaven or hell. So you get it? John is taking a parable in Luke and turning it into a real historical story, completely 100% made up, all to make the point the exact opposite of Luke is like, no, we're going to have evidence that people did return from the dead and convince people, and I'm going to make that evidence up because I don't actually have any. But so he's correcting Luke, right? John cites this Lazarus as a witness to the crucifixion, empty tomb, and resurrection. Notice the number 3 there. 3 things that he's this new Lazarus, this new beloved disciple. And he says that Lazarus is there explicitly to convince people. So the Lazarus and John has done what the rich man in Luke, the parable in Luke, is done what that rich man wanted.